Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the 2020 USRowing Convention. Our next presentation is on adaptive rigging, specifically for PR1 and PR2. Today, our presenters are Alice Henderson from Bear Island Aquatic Center, along with Dr. Anthony Matan. They'll be easing us through the mystery of these. They're going to make it seem like it's easy. Let me put it that way. So I am going to disappear. You are encouraged to put your questions into the Q&A section, and we will answer some of them in the middle of the presentation. Some of them will hold off to the end for the Q&A section. So without further ado, jump right in.
Good morning. I'm Tony Matten, and Alice Henderson's here with me. Alice, do you want to do the introductions and then I'll get started?
Oh, sure. Hello. I'm Alice. I don't think they really care that much about us. They can Google us. I think they care about rigging. And Tony and I both are at Bear Island Aquatic Center, which is outside of San Francisco. And our passion is para rowing, and Tony rowed for Cal and I rowed for Washington, and it proves that people that are from different backgrounds can come together and do something well together.
The odd couple.
All yours.
Yeah, hi, Tony Matten. Alice has been my mentor, and I am very interested in adaptive rowing. Like I said there, I rowed in the 80s for Cal, which I put up there because Alice rowed for Washington. I have rowing in the family. My sons are rowers. I went through the level 2 coaching, which I highly recommend for anyone getting started. I am a doctor. I'm a surgeon. I'm a specialist in acute care of spinal injuries, including spinal cord injuries. And I do have an interest in adaptive and para rowing. So next slide, please. So our agenda, we're going to go over a quick overview of the para classifications, and then some concepts that I'm going to try to contribute with my background. And Alice has more of the technical expertise as far as rigging. And so I'll be learning as much as anyone from her portion. So next slide, please. So I'm fascinated with the Paralympics and the whole concept. Evidently, there was a little controversy about this when we were discussing it between ourselves, but it initially started way back when as Olympics for paralyzed people, but switched to para, as in the Greek term, like parallel, and includes athletes with a range of physical disabilities. And again, we're not just talking about Olympic level adaptive athletes, but this just gives an idea of the range and the challenge of working with adaptive athletes, because it is a heterogeneous bunch. And these are the official, and you got to start somewhere. So the Paralympic group movement has thought about this a lot, and these are the official designations. And as you can see, it's just quite a wide range, everything from loss of muscle power to congenital short stature to loss of ability to control muscle groups, amputations, visual impairments, a very wide range of adaptions that need to be done. The classification system that USRowing uses, because the simple concept is that athletes do need to be divided by the degree of impairment in order to compete. And again, it's interesting, of course, because we're all in the sport of rowing and we love competition. So you get 2 boats out, you got a boat race, right? So you need to have them divided, but it also is a very useful, this again, a lot of thought has gone into this, and it's useful looking at it a little bit just to understand the range of physical disabilities and physical adaptations that have to be made to get lots of different athletes into the sport. And so the intention to open a sport to as many athletes as possible and to compete against athletes with similar abilities. And often in the adaptive world, we're interested in the first part, opening the sport to as many athletes as possible. And therefore it helps to think about the types of and ranges of disability. And there's, of course, a range of impairments within each classification. So a big challenge is how to account for the wide variety and severity of disabilities. Okay, next.
Oh, yep.
So back one, please. Okay, one forward. Yeah, so there we go. So as you can see, I mean, you know, when you say adaptive athletes or athletes with disabilities, the range is almost infinite. So here are two well-known athletes who have adapted to disabilities. Shaquem Griffin, who, if anyone's a Seahawks fan here, they know him quite well, was born with constriction ring syndrome and has adapted to that. And then here's an athlete, Moen Jonetti, on the Indian Paralympic team, who has a significantly different range of issues and has adapted quite well to that. And so this is just to illustrate the range and to have the fluidity of thinking that has to go into both the capabilities as well as the adaptations needed in working with athletes with disabilities. Next slide. Yeah, so the official designations, PR1, exemplified by Blake Haxton here, a U.S. national team athlete, the 2016 U.S. Rowing Male Athlete of the Year, bilateral lower extremity amputations at the hip, and he is in PR1. He exemplifies PR1 where the power is generated without the core or the trunk. So next slide, please. PR2, and Isaac French is well known, U.S. men's single scull 2019, competed in the World Championships, bilateral amputations below the knees, and he competes in PR2 where the power is generated without the use of the slide. And next slide. And PR3, Jacqueline Smith is an excellent example, world champion in the pair in 2019. Legally blind, and power is generated by the legs, trunks, and arms with a sliding seat. So just there's some idea of the range. So we're going to get into this topic that Alice brought up, this question, which I thought was fascinating, and it's always a good question that leads to some discovery. She had an opinion about this, but the question is PR1 rowing the same as an athlete who comes to rowing without a disability doing the pick drill? Because she says she has heard coaches say, well, I can coach PR1, I've coached the pick drill. And so it's very interesting and to think about it. And so that was I took it on as a little task and decided to think it through. And again, I don't know who's in the audience. I'm not a kinesiologist. I'm not a physical therapist. I'm not an athletic trainer. I think there's people that probably have more sort of practical experience with this, but certainly with my background, I'm equipped to begin thinking this problem through. So there's a picture on the right of an athlete who can use the slide and trunk for power, and an athlete who can't. And on the left, an athlete who cannot, who's doing PR1 rowing. So next slide. Yeah, so the way I approach this is look at the guy on the right. He's a big guy. He's doing, let's say, military. He's pressing that weight over his head. And if you think about it, if you look at his shoulders, I kind of put a broomstick between his shoulders, and that's like an axle or a hub. And then his arms are lifting from the shoulders into the air, and his shoulders are being supported by that bench. And to illustrate that, for a mental exercise, just imagine if that bench snapped right now. That guy would fall backwards off that thing, right? So so there is a lot of support. And if you think about what I have on the left, I am not going to beat you up with that diagram, but there are physical forces at play here. And those shoulders are not just floating in the air. They are being physically supported by that bench. That bench is holding a lot of weight up right now. And without that bench, his shoulders would go to the ground. So there's his shoulders, his arms are keeping those weights above his shoulders, but there's something keeping his shoulders off the ground, and it's that bench right now. So next slide. So here's a guy who looks very athletic and fit, and he's now lifting weight over his head. And one thing you notice is look at his core. This guy is, first of all, enviable physique and he's ripped, but his core is working. And so, you know, there's a little bit of a tendency for that weight to want to rotate, for the shoulders to want to rotate back if we think of them as an axle, and then he's counterbalancing that by firing his core. And so this is not just a simple, it's easy to think of this as a shoulder exercise, but it's a full body exercise, right? Because his core is supporting and lifting the shoulders, and then the shoulders are doing the work. The core is providing the directional stability. So, okay, so let's watch this guy. This is a little bit tougher, and he's not lifting any weights. He's just trying to kneel on this ball. But again, imagine a broomstick through the shoulders. So the picture on the right, he's just trying, now he's not even lifting weights. He's not doing work with those axles. He's just trying to keep those broomsticks even and up in the air, but he's not standing. He can't use his core to support himself. And I think this just, picture yourself doing this. I think a lot of us have tried this. It's hard. And so just kind of picture what he's kind of physically doing in order just to keep his shoulders squared. And you can see he's using his vision. He's looking ahead. He's balancing himself on that little ball. So that's a little tougher. It's hard to get the shoulder stable without a connection to without a good connection to the floor. All right, next slide. So, okay, now a whole different ball game, if you will. Sorry. So here's this guy, and these are pictures I just pulled offline. I don't know these people, but he's a buffed guy. He looks fit. He looks like he works out. He's probably physically competent. So the first thing you notice is look at those little tiny weights compared to the guy that was doing this in the gym on a bench. And look at the ball. I don't think, Alice and I were talking, I don't think it's an accident that he's at the beach, because what he probably did was like made a little divot and like push that ball in there so the ball is supported as well as possible. He can't really utilize his core much at this point, not the way like the picture of the guy standing there lifting a bunch of weight over his head. It's a lot trickier, right? He's not connected to the floor. So it's a different ball game. He's using smaller weights and having to really balance those broomsticks on his own. So we jump. Does everyone else see in this slide? We jump to this. Yeah, this is not
right. That's the right slide.
Yeah, this is not this one. So the answer to the question is, if you think about it, even in those, if you think about it in terms of the biomechanics of what's involved, it's staggering how different these two activities are, because the athlete on the left is doing this on the ball, and the athlete on the right is standing on the floor, if you will, to use the analogy. Of course, obviously, the physics of rowing are different than doing, I'm not comparing in any way rowing to powerlifting, but just the concept of what you're working with, I think, applies very well. I was talking to some of my colleagues at work about this, and they were talking about athletes with spinal cord injuries they've worked with and how appropriate this is. So then on top of that, on top of the biomechanical challenge of, let's say, just purely, let's just talk about PR1 rowing, and let's keep it to say as a spinal cord injury, which is a very, again, a thin subset of the world of adaptive and para athletes. But this applies across the board. Loss of proprioception, unconscious perception. So if you have lost, so a definition of proprioception is the perception unconscious of where your body is in space, but it is an actual physical activity your body is doing. You have these Golgi receptors in your tendons that are telling you where that limb is in space. So an athlete who is missing limbs, it does not have the same complement of proprioceptive feedback as an athlete that has full neurologic connection to their limbs. And so that is an interesting difference if you think about it. So not only if you were PR1, certain PR1 athletes, not only are they on the ball, so to speak, they're on the ball with limited data getting to the brain about where they are. So it makes it more remarkable if you think about it. Next slide. Alterations in autonomic regulation. This could be not universal to adaptive or para athletes, but certainly not uncommon. And your autonomic regulation, again, is unconscious regulation. We don't, at the first 20 strokes of a race, we don't think, okay, heart, let's go. Okay, lungs, let's go. You fire off on your start and your heart and lungs follow, right? Automatically and unconsciously. That does not always happen in certain neurologic and other conditions. So not only is the athlete on the ball, not only are they receiving, so you can start to see how different it is between the two activities. The pick drill for an athlete that comes to the sport with no disabilities and say a PR1 rower. But the PR1 rower is still handling the mechanics of the stroke, and you can start to imagine how the way in which those mechanics are handled could now be seen as being a very different undertaking. The same goals in terms of applying power, but a different biomechanical undertaking. Next slide. And I'm not here to share how we fix this. The athlete still has to handle conditions. We're still going out and racing a boat. It's still a boat race. Your boat has to get from the starting line to the finish line before the other boats, and challenges will come up, right? But how that's physically done will be a little different. Next slide. Executing a race plan. You can get there, you can get into the race, and and once you're in the race, you want to win the race, you got to execute your plan. And so those challenges and opportunities are still there. Next slide. So the more I thought about it, the more I thought the two of them are nothing alike. Rowing without a disability and rowing, say, PR1. And then the more you think about it and think about the sport of rowing, they're totally the same. You look at these pictures and it's the pain game, it's people pushing themselves, it's doing this and loving it, being a little bit crazy enough to think this is what I want to do on my Saturday morning. And so that mentality is the same, and we all are all in, and we all end up there at the end of the race. But again, I appreciate Alice's question prompting this line of thought. And again, this is just a very opening introduction to thinking this through, that the answer that I came to is that PR1 rowing is not the same as the pick drill for lots of good reasons. And with that, I will pass over to Alice.
Thanks, Tony. And we can open it up to some questions. If anybody has questions, they're supposed to be typing it in there. Some people are texting me, which mostly it's not questions, they're saying nice things, but it's also intimidating to know what a quality audience we have doing this. And when Tony shared this presentation with me, I was super excited because I think a lot of people are coaching and have good intentions, but trying to understand, most of us we're able-bodied rowers, and now we're translating what we learned. And so having this fundamental to understand how it is fundamentally different is super valuable. All right, so I'm going to go into taking what Tony just talked about and how can we rig to accommodate all the things that Tony talked about. First off, let's just acknowledge this is a pioneering sport. Rigging for para athletes, for adaptive athletes, we're doing pioneer stuff. There isn't a rigging book per se. We're gathering knowledge. Deb, who was doing the introduction, has knowledge, and we're trying to gather it and share it as we go. But our goal is, Tony, Deb, and my goal after this is that people feel empowered to take on trying to coach para and adaptive athletes, because if you have a base knowledge, you can make those adjustments and help people get on the water. Next slide. Oh, there it is. Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong screen. Okay, good. So how do we rig? So rigging for comfort is super important. That's the #1 thing. The day somebody shows up, whoever they are, you're going to rig them for comfort. So rigging for comfort, safety, speed, and performance comes after that. And it's probably a big gap between comfort and safety and then speed and performance. And this is a picture of one of my athletes who's helping me rig. And relying on your athletes to help you is really important because they have lived in their body and are an expert on their body. And so being open to your athletes and talking to them and educating them so that they can help you rig for them and they can be part of that process, I think is pretty critical. Next slide. So one size fits one person. You know, that's more true in adaptive rowing than it is for, let's say, high school or college rowing. But if you coach masters, you kind of understand that there might be lack of flexibility in their ankles. And high school boys, you know, depending on where they are on their growth spurt, their hamstrings have no flexibility. So along the lines of trying to inspire you to feel like you could coach and you could rig for adaptive athletes, if you're coaching anybody other than maybe the national team where they all are, you know, the same size and the same flexibility, you're already working with the differences of the people. And actually, I would argue it will make you a better coach when you start to think about your individuals in the 8 versus making everybody the same. Okay, so one of the things I find is that we talk a lot about para rowers, and you know, someone walks in that first day and they're going to be an Olympian. And if you coach high school or colleges, you can look at certain athletes on the first day and think that kid has a lot of potential, but it would be sort of foolish to say 8 years from now, that's the kid who's going to make it, because they might have the right body, but not the right mindset, or the right mindset and not the right body, or they fall in love, or whatever it is that takes them out of the sport. So I encourage people to think about when an athlete comes to them and they want to row and they need some adaptation, that you look at them as a human. You don't look at them as how you're going to get to the Paralympics with them, and that will make them happier and you happier. But also reflecting back upon the earlier presentation, as well as what Tony said, not everybody is going to be able to be classified as an elite rower, and or not everybody wants to be an elite rower. So meeting people where they are, helping them figure out what they're trying to find out of the sport. You know, there are a lot of people that are very happy just out rowing around for some cardio and looking at the wildlife. So if that's who this person is, then that, I would argue, is how you should help them be a rower at that level. One key thing with PR1 and PR2 is thinking about strapping for safety, not racing. So when people are training, the strapping them to the boat, PR1 all have straps of some sort, and that facilitates them being able to row better. But the strapping for training and for starting is to make them comfortable and safe. All right, good rowing is good rowing. Hopefully you have, you know, you guys are doing professional development by being here. You're listening to other presentations. No matter who you are, get the oar in, and then you get accelerated and get it out cleanly. you're going to be faster than the person who doesn't do that. So that is a universal truth. And then how do we help people do that? So good rowing is still good rowing. Okay, so the goal is always about the athlete being safe and secure, which performance will follow to that. So let's talk about rigging for novices. All athletes want to improve physically, flexibility. I mean, that's probably why they showed up, was for the exercise of it, which means, back to the strapping, that where the strap is on race day is might be constricting for some people, and they might want to train with the strap being looser so that they can work on their full range of motion. I have some people might be able to do quarter slide rowing, which would make them a PR2 athlete, but they want to use their legs. I have found people want to use what they have and they want to increase it. So thinking about strapping and constraints just for support. You will meet some athletes that if they don't have that strap on, they're literally going to fall out, talking about what Tony was talking about earlier, and if you're on the classifier presentation. So that's obvious. But if they have the ability, let them use their full range and work with them to see what that is and what those limits are. Not about racing, but about being a better athlete. Okay, so here is an example of one of my athletes, Carrie, and this has got a lot going on it. So the first day, she and I are out there in an old Pocock trainer canoe, like it would make a coastal boat look small. It is just a beast, and we've got our tulip oars, and it's her first day rowing, and she doesn't know. She thinks this is great. She thinks this is a sexy little boat with great oars. A couple years later, she's racing at the Crew Classic as a PR2 athlete in a boat that's been rigged to fit her and everything. But we had to start in one place to end up in another place. And I encourage you to take the equipment you have and meet the athletes where they are, and then kind of grow your program together. All right, we have a lot of different regattas that include now adaptive rowing, which is fabulous. So if you've got an athlete and they want to race, again, if they don't want to race, they just want to do cardio, at least at my boathouse, we have a lot of people who are recreational, and that's okay. And I think the same should be for adaptive athletes. But if the athlete wants to race, then trying to figure out how to rig for that kind of performance and to set them up for that, and to think about with the rigging, what's the distance you're going to do. So the woman on the left is named Jane, and she is a PR1 rower in Alaska. So her season is really small, but she races annually a 5K as a PR1 racer, and that's her local regatta is a 5K, and that's what she does. So her rigging is going to be a little bit different because her season's 2 months and her race is a 5K. And then the other picture is PR2 double from the United States a couple of Olympics ago. And you can see those straps, those orange things on their legs are their straps, and they're clearly rigged for a different kind of competition. So Jim Dietz did a webinar back when the pandemic started that had good information about rigging. I would say that's a great place to start knowing about rigging, and then kind of taking what you know and throwing it away and trying to focus on the athlete. But the key bit about the rigging is, I love that picture of the two bikers, right? Like, back to someone can be recreational and someone can be competing, and they're both happy, and you just have to figure it out for what they need. So I encourage you to know the basics and then just think outside the box. So this is the German PR2 man, and look at his oarlocks. He is racing at the World Championships with his oarlocks backwards. We would say backwards, but it was intentional. And this was how he and his coach and his riggers and German engineers thought that he would be have his optimum performance. And in fact, he was one spot out of qualifying for Tokyo. Top 8 qualified and they placed 9th. So this is thinking outside the box in a huge way. There's a lot to go into how they achieved this, but know your basics and then figure out what to do for the athlete to make it better for them. So where to start with PR1? This slide, this is a special event back when we could do special events. And if you're really new and you don't know much about wheelchairs and they're intimidating to you, one of the challenges is transferring when someone in a chair goes to the next place. So that could be their bed, that could be the erg, it could be the floor, whatever that next place is that they're trying to go to, that term is transferring. So at these special events, sometimes we had fixed seat ergs at this event, but this man looked at that and thought that would be too daunting for him. And again, he's an expert on what he knows about himself, and he just thought it would take too much time. He really wanted to try it. So we popped off the rail and he's having a great time erging from his chair. And there's someone standing on the erg, because when someone with arms like that is wailing on an erg, it flies. So you got to put a little bit of extra weight on it. But this is a great way to start. And it also could be the terminus. If you're a rower like Tony and I, where we were assessed and tested and beat up on ergs, we have kind of a different relationship with the erg. But if you're somebody who's used to being in a chair and exercising your muscles in a way to propel your chair forward, having the erg kind of opens up your body and is a great way to exercise. And they have a different relationship and fondness toward the erg that some of us might have, and trying to remember that the erg might be an ending place for some of our adaptive athletes, and they might be very happy ending there. Like maybe they don't want to go on the water, maybe they want to do this, but this is definitely a way to get people to try rowing and to try the erg at an event. Is just pop that rail off. Super easy to do. Okay, so I really like to use the erg. I don't have the background that Tony has on anatomy. So when I meet people and they start talking to me about their issues and where they've been injured or what they have, I listen and I try and understand, but I really do most of my assessment on the erg and just watching them get onto the erg. And how comfortable are they getting onto the erg? How comfortable are they with the layback and the reach, and then strapping, as I already said, to meet that. And so spending a couple of sessions maybe on the rowing machine, maybe more than you would with like a master's class or something, so that you can figure out the optimum rigging for them on the erg and where the strap goes and how they're comfortable before you go to the water, but taking that learning with you on where that strap is best to make them comfortable. All right, so, you know, that arc is something that we're always looking for, and to try to have the oars, just as a rule of thumb, at the catch parallel to the riggers. Obviously it's a front rigger, but they do make special, they're called AS riggers for arms and shoulders, which is now PR1 riggers. If you don't have that rigger, that doesn't preclude you from trying to introduce fixed seat rowing to your athletes. The thing about the AS rigger, it's a plus and minus, is that the chevron is different. It just different inboard. It could be very good. It can also be a little less stable. So in this picture, they are using pontoons, which makes everybody stable. But if you're using an AS rigger and you don't have the pontoons, it might just be a little less stable because of how that rigger's in tight. You just have to work on trying to figure out the connection. And again, thinking outside the box, we're going to talk a little bit about how the foot stretcher allows people to have contact, even if they don't have a lot of control with that. But for some people, just taking the foot stretcher out might be better, especially if they're recreational. All right, here are the top 2 women in the world currently with PR1 rowing. And I'm showing you the finish and saying, clearly they're both successful and they're finishing in different places in different ways. There's a 4-inch difference in height. I also think that the Norwegian might have a taller torso, but know your basics and then figure out what works best for your athletes. And this is just an example of 2 people that are doing different things really well and being successful. Okay, PR2. So PR2 has more of a range of motion, and strapping is optional for racing in PR2. And if it makes the person happier or safer, then definitely go with the strapping. One thing I think we alluded to, but I didn't explicitly say, is your athlete is going to change as you work with them, right? The same way as your master athlete who comes to you who can't touch their toes, if you add stretching to their rowing routine, they will be able to do that, or they drop 10 pounds because they're now rowing. So your athletes are also going to change physically with training with you. Their ability, what they can and cannot change might be fixed, but the strapping requirement when they start might be different than when they have been rowing for 2 years. So make sure it's an ongoing assessment of the strapping that they need to be comfortable and to be quick if you're trying to race. So once the athlete is comfortable, using the monitor to see how one position is stronger than another is super helpful on the erg. You probably already know that, but always good to hear. I also like to assume the standard layback. People try and make their stroke longer, but as you know, you really need an impressive core to get your layback like much further than the standard. And a lot of people don't come to you with an impressive core. So starting with some known things and then going from there. The one thing that is for sure going to be true is that to free up their hips to get that forward reach, they're going to have to sit a little bit higher. In the same way as probably most of you, if you sat on the floor and tried to touch your toes, you're going to have a harder time getting past your toes than if you sat on like a yoga block, or if you sat on 2 yoga blocks. So the higher their center of gravity, that creates some challenges, but trying to free up their hips and having them be able to rotate forward is going to be helpful. And one little hack is when they're on the erg, to see if you're on the right path before you do a lot of stuff, have them take their feet and put them underneath the foot stretchers so their feet are flat on the ground and their hips will be much more free. And then you'll know if you're on the right path, how to free up their hips by putting it forward. Okay. Be systematic and take good notes with your athletes. There's the standard measurements we do, but also from the pin to the front of the seat and then the height of the seat is really going to make a difference. Okay. So in reality, coaches probably have a small fleet of short oars to use and to choose from. And I would say if you're thinking about where to start, that 1 or 2 set of short oars plus pontoons, if you're not already using them, those will be really helpful for you. And then here's another hot tip, is that pontoons are a great way to make masters or whoever you're teaching be able to row in those singles that we all now are finding ourselves in, be able to start by rowing square blades, which if you know me, I'm a fanatic about square blades and the path to happiness. But if you have pontoons, all of your beginners can use those pontoons and they will be arguably better rowers for having those. And then the other thing that is helpful is the shorter oars. I keep saying master's programs, but if you're a master's program and you have a man who shows up who's 6'2" and he's got an extra 60 pounds, you can get him to fit in the boat, right? He's going to go 3/4 slide. He's going to have a hard time rotating over, but he can go out and row and he can lose some of that weight and have a good experience. However, if you have a short woman who is equally as overweight, that's very hard to figure out how to put her in a boat. But if you use the short oars, which are supposed to be for fixed seat athletes, if you use those for short, heavy women, then they also can row because they got room they have room at the finish now. And then as they lose weight, they can transition to a different set of equipment. So this equipment isn't going to just sit and not be utilized if you're thinking outside of the box. I call my short oars party oars, and I have special tape on them because I don't know, whoever I'm using them for, it just seems like better to say party oars. Okay, so overlap or not in PR2, and the overlap of the sculling blades is what we're talking about. And PR2 is predominant, and PR1, we're talking about sculling. I'm going to say I don't know anybody who sweeps who's PR2, but there's a lot I don't know. So there could be a pair out there that's sweeping, but for the most part, everybody's sculling. So with the overlap, different people need different things. And I would say it's 50-50 depending on if they have overlap, but if they do, it's going to be a little bit of overlap, and there's pros and cons. And it's a personal preference mixed with your availability of equipment. But work with your athlete to see what is easiest. And if you're using your regular boat and they are not overlapping, remember to change your spacers to be unequal, because the left is no longer higher than the right. The starboard's not higher than the port. Okay. Another coach kind of made up this term too archy, which I really like. You know, as a sculler, our body is going in a straight line, right? Our seat is in a straight line, and our oars and our hands are making arcs. That's how we scull, right? So the more overlap we have, the more it feels like we're drawing through in a straight line. But if you get your hands further and further away from you, the more you really do feel you're making those circles out there, and ergonomics still applies. So hanging on straight arms, being able to pull through in a straight position is still important. So be careful that you don't get it too archy. Having said that, jamming your thumbs together in the middle of the drive is super painful. So you might have more overlap when they're novices, when they're forgetting to keep pressure against their gates. And then as they're learning to keep that outward pressure, you might take away a little bit of that length on the inboard so that they can be closer together, but there's no chance of hitting their thumbs. All right. I made up this graph because I've seen some some data that I can't share with you, but if you're using a para boat, so now we're talking about racing, right? So these para boats are big, flat, heavy boats, and we're rowing fixed seat. They don't really run out and glide as far as the traditional boats that we use. So when you think about that, now we're getting into competitive rowing, right? When you think about that, what are you going to have to do? How are you going to change that up? And what you probably need to do is to up the stroke rate a little bit, and just not count on that trajectory going up after the finish. Okay. I don't know the age, but for those of you that are old enough to know MacGyver, he always used to fix everything with duct tape. I'm more of a zip tie gal, but I also carry foam with me. My para coaching bag is completely different than when I'm not coaching para. There's a lot of foam, different types of foams, different thicknesses of foams, different types of tape, because you'll be out on the water and you realize you need to make a change. I've also never used a paper clip, but this is what was available. Okay, so this is Andrew. We row near a port, and this was a boat that was in the port, and I thought, well, you gotta take a picture with that right next to it. But Andrew rode in high school, and he had an accident 4 years ago, and he is now a walking quadriplegic. So he has challenges walking, but he's a walking quadriplegic. He is a great, big, tall guy. When he started rowing with me, his core was his limiting factor. That is what would fatigue first. So the red thing is a fixed seat. So Andrew is rowing with a fixed seat and a rolling slide. And so that seat is there to kind of protect him from falling too far back as he gets tired, and to support him so that he can continue to row. So he went from rowing 2 minutes to be able to doing 20 minutes because we attached that fixed seat. This is kind of a janky rig because it was in our beta testing. It got much better. And then Andrew's from Buffalo, and he actually, with the pandemic, had to go back to Buffalo, and he was being coached by Sasha in Buffalo, and they have figured out a more attractive rig that supports him, and his pontoons are off. So he's a walking quadriplegic on a rolling seat with a back to it. So this is a great picture of thinking outside the box. And as he said, the first day we tried this, this is a game changer, and it's awesome. Okay, PR2. So if you're using a fixed seat, there's lots of different seats. You can spend $1,000 for a seat, or you can buy some foam. And I use, as I said, a lot of foam. This is that floor foam stuff. And when I like it because you can just kind of stack it up and take one out and add one and move it around really easily. The challenge with any of these flat fixed seats is that when they have a really strong stroke with good connection, or when they have a really crappy stroke and the boat becomes unstable, then how do you know where center is again? And so these, I call them tractor seats. These little tractor seats are really helpful for helping them stay over keel. If you're using just a big black smooth surface, it's easy to get lost and then to find keel again. It can take a while. So I like those. And foam, as I said, foam. So this is a picture of those alphabet flooring that you can buy for kids. These are great. You need a razor blade, but these are great. You can travel with them. You can buy them at regattas. You can stack it up, pile it up. So that's what that colorful thing is. And then here's a picture of one of our athletes, and you can see she has blue noodles and yellow noodles. I think those are slightly different thicknesses. They're strapped, and they're supporting her, and they're helping her to be at her optimum for racing. So stack up on your noodles. Okay, so here's some hacks that I think we're in the whole hack section up above. I would say we're in hacks. So you probably have not seen this before, but when you need more inboard, it costs less to put a sleeve on than to buy a whole new set of oars. And this is an option. It's not a very glamorous option, but it is an inexpensive option that you can do. And the nice thing, if you've ever had to put sleeves on, the nice thing about doing this is you can use the first sleeve as kind of a shim, so that it guides you to get the second sleeve to match the correct orientation. So it's not even as daunting as it could be. I have one visually impaired rower who uses the Concept 2 bolt bump to figure out the orientation of their oar. And it makes a big difference, especially when they're learning on how to do that. Okay, so I'm getting messages, I gotta be faster. So another hack is for PR2, because they're sitting up, and PR1, I just now buy sweep pins and put sculling oar locks on them. WinTech allows me to do that. Next slide. All of these athletes are gonna be connecting through their feet, and you can try and find a expensive sensor to do that. I use my finger, and you can really tell when you've changed the rigging on how much they're pressing on their foot, even if they don't feel that. That's what Tony was talking about earlier. Even if they don't have sensitivity in their foot, when they're pushing on it, you know. So tools for performance. How do you know you're making the correct changes? Heart rate, if you're training for elites, the erg, stroke coach, same kind of stuff that we do. We being everybody else. Okay, key takeaways is if you can coach masters, you can do this. Know the basics, adjust, And long story on how this happened, but I love coxing. I'm 6'1", I'm not built for it, but it was great to be sitting in the double and to be able to literally feel everything she was doing and coaching her that way. Okay, and again, this is our PR1 rower, and she doesn't have her pontoons on, and she'd been working a lot on stability, and I love this picture because she has achieved that, and it's a really big deal. Don't do this with your novices. All right, so now Deb, what are our questions?
Thank you. I have just put a query out to get some comments or questions coming in. That's a lot of information. I think people are digesting. I do have one question that is certainly related, and from Lucy. The question is, can you comment on para-athletes as coxswains, and is that something that's been considered at this time?
Well, yeah, not the visually impaired, but I think it depends on the disability, but there are a lot of different types and sizes of coxswains. So I would say yes. I think safety is always a concern, right? So if their disability has a harder time with swimming, then you would definitely want to wear a life jacket. And then, you know, yes, I would, depends on the limits, but a good coxswain is a good coxswain.
I know where you have your program at Bear Island, there are sometimes, and I'm sure it's this way nationally, there are a lot of challenges with doing athlete transfer, getting athletes to the water, down a gangway, into a dock. Can you comment a little bit on maybe an amendment that you might have done at Bear Island that's helped you out?
Yeah, so we are super tidal. And so first off, when we hold special events, we check the tide chart so that our ramp and dock are flat. And it's sort of like teaching novices in the afternoon and then telling them they have to train at 5 in the morning. So we bring people down when everything's flat and easy. And then as they get involved, we make it more challenging. But I would say we assist with the ramp and help people get down the ramp. The ramp is the biggest problem, as well as transferring is really can be difficult if the person isn't able to help a lot with the transfer. So going from the dock to the boat, talking to them on like we could put a yoga mat down and they can go directly from the dock into the boat. But I am always really clear with my volunteers and with the athletes that no one should get hurt in the transfer process. So I'm no longer the strength where I can just lift up a grown man and put him into a boat carefully. And because of the boat, right, you can't get on all sides of somebody. And this is outside of a pandemic in our 6-foot margin, right? So if people aren't able to help themselves to a degree with the transfer, then I think we focus on the rowing machine and have a good practice and trainings and that, because athletes are also terrified about us dropping them headfirst into the water. So.
Right. Alice, I'm going to get this last question in before we close. Thanks to both of you. This has been amazing, very thorough. This last question is, what are the rules concerning hacks at the international level? And do you have to have equipment inspected and approved by FISA? When is a hack considered an unfair advantage? That will be our last question for today.
Well, that would be a whole seminar. And if you've got good hints, call me and we can come up with a scheme. But yeah, like we don't put rivulets on 8s. So for sure there are rules about equipment. And the hack is if it's a fixed seat and it helps the athletes be comfortable, that's probably going to be okay. And then there's a huge classification and rules on where the strapping has to be. And there are absolutely people watching, especially at international competition, to make sure it's a fair playing field.